5 terrible mistakes I made as a beginner violinist that cost me a lot of time, actually years of unproductive practice and slow progress. Right, number one is the intent is to help anyone watching this video who is just starting up their journey as a violinist, or if you've probably been playing for a while now and you feel that your practice is not as productive as you want it to be. This should help you. Moving on, the first terrible mistake I made was not clearly defining my strong why for wanting to play the violin. And although I had a reason, which was a good reason now thinking about it. So personally, I started the violin as a teenager, right? And the reason I wanted to play the violin was because there was an opportunity in church, yeah, to teach the violin a lot of instruments, and I chose the violin because in the church, in the branch I was, there was a keyboard. It's a young guy playing the keyboard, and I was so inspired by him playing the keyboard. Yeah, he was young, and the first time I went to church, that church, I just met this young boy on the keyboard, and I was like, I was going to play an instrument. I was going to play the keyboard, but then I thought that if I played the keyboard, then I would have to compete with him, who was already playing very well, and he was already playing in church, of course. So I had to pick an instrument wasn't that I wouldn't have to compete with anybody. So the violin was my most preferred choice, and I kind of like calculated that many churches, especially back then in my country, did not have violin as part of the instrumentalist. So I thought that yeah, it was going to be nice if I could learn to play the violin and then play in church, right? So that was my reason, and which was actually a good reason, but I did not clearly define it. And along the way, I forgot about it, and I was doing other things aside from strictly pursuing the reason why I wanted to play the violin, and that really took a lot of my time that could have been used productively to achieve my desired goal. Right? So you want to clearly define your why for wanting to play the violin, the reason you want to play the violin. What is that thing that you desire to achieve? Where do you see yourself at as a violinist? Right? When I ask most of my students, prospective students, why they want to learn to play the violin, now most of the time, most often than not, I get a very generic reason that I like the sound of the instrument, which is a good place to start. I must point out that's a good place to start. But as you journey, you want to redefine that why, because it's not strong enough to push you through to that point where you want to be, right? Because the point where you are at currently and the point where you want to be, there's a phase where you would not like the sound of the violin because of you're just starting off. Second terrible mistake I made as a beginner violinist was not following through with a teaching method for a long period of time. So when I started my journey as a violinist, I had several teachers. That was because I was learning in church, like I mentioned earlier, and for some reason teachers had to stop, and then they brought another teacher. And when they brought another teacher, he came with a method that was maybe slightly different from the previous teacher, and so I had to unlearn certain things and relearn certain things, and that took a lot of productive time from my journey, right? And while there was an advantage to that because I learned different styles of teaching, which I now apply now as a teacher, I know okay for certain students this teaching method works better than this. The advantage was that I had to unlearn, like I said, and relearn certain things. And for me, it was like trial and error. I had to go through a phase of trial and error. And when I actually did not have a teacher and I decided to self-teach myself, I was caught in between what method to follow through it. Yeah, and that took a lot of time as well. So that was the second terrible mistake I made as a beginner violinist. And for you that's hoping to start your journey, or you've probably started your journey, you want to be consistent with the teaching method or a method of playing for a while. And if there is need for change, then you could then review and then see if there are areas you need to adjust. The third terrible mistake I made as a beginner violinist that cost me productive time and slowed my progress is closely linked to the previous point I mentioned. So, because I did not have a teacher then at some point and I had to self teach myself, I did not have a curriculum to work with, and I didn't have a teacher to guide me. Oh, this is the next thing to do. And so I was caught in between. Oh, what should I practice next? At some point, I had maybe practiced what I knew before, and then I didn't know the next step to take. And this cost me a lot of productive time. I remember the story. So I've been playing the violin just in the first position for years before even shifting to the third position. And then when I got to the university, I was fortunate to teach a friend of mine um, how to play run through his major scales on the violin, 12 major scales on the violin. And within months, he was able to get that, achieve that. And before you know, he started shifting positions, even better than I could. And I realized that, I mean, I've been playing for years, and perhaps I was even afraid of shifting positions because I didn't want to sound horrible. First position is kind of like safe as a beginner. Yeah, and so at that point I realized that I needed to work on my shifting. And when we had holidays, I went back home and started working on my shifting because I didn't want my friend that I just thought to play better than I was already playing. Yeah. So that I realized that I spent a lot of productive time practicing or just repeating things that I'd gotten rather than forging ahead because I did not know what next to do. And since my friend had me to guide him, he was able to achieve that within a short period of time. So that was a third terrible mistake I made, and I wouldn't want anybody to make that mistake. Now the fourth terrible mistake I made was not having clearly defined goals on what I wanted to achieve. And I did not know this for a long time. I was just practicing for the sake of practicing or because there was sort of a positive competition between myself and my friend. Oh, we just wanted to get better. And we'll probably, I see him doing something. I'm like, yo, he's already doing this. I go practice so that I could also be able to play that. Perhaps he could play a technique and I could not play that technique yet. I would go and practice so that I could play that technique better than he was already doing, which was okay, but was that taking me towards my goal, my destination? Was that making me a more proficient violinist with respect to why I started playing the violin in the first place? Maybe not. Yes, generally speaking, yeah, I could play some techniques, I could probably do certain things, play some certain songs that my friend also could play and all of that stuff. But with respect to moving me towards my desired goal, because I had not set a goal and linked to my why, my purpose. Remember the first point I mentioned? That was just a lot of time being wasted, a lot of productive time that I could have been maximized more. Now, until I took a course from Christian House, who is an amazing string teacher, by the way. Then he sent a document on certain goals, and that kind of like gave me a picture on how to clearly set goals in respect to my practice. And I also did that to for my students, right? So I also helped my students set clearly defined goals. I also created a poll, like a poll, and helped them give them examples of goals they could set with respect to their reason, their why for learning to play the violin. And this kind of like really just made me maximize my practice time. So having clearly defined goals determines what you should be practicing, what techniques you currently need, what techniques are of priority. The fifth terrible mistake I made as a beginner violinist that cost me productive time was not recording myself and listening back. I wish I did, man, because I know the effect it has on my students now that I encourage to record themselves and listen back. And that was the thing. That was one of the points that I was mentioning. I pointed out to me and the students. So you need to record yourself and listen back. Then you could give yourself feedback, right? If I started recording myself earlier, I could have observed areas I needed to work on, areas I could improve upon, areas I was actually getting correctly. Right? When you listen back to yourself play, you could see maybe faults in you could point out faults in your intonation or eh, things you could improve upon, areas that you're actually doing pretty well. So you don't just want to point out areas that you are doing badly. Also, you could also commend yourself for areas you are improving upon, and then you could track your progress. At this point, or at this particular point in time, I was playing this way. At this particular point in time, I'm playing this way. Yeah, so that's one of the things my current students enjoy, because they can track their progress. Right, I have a student who I taught online, and he could track all his progress for a year because he has been recording from the day he started playing violin, from the first day I started playing the violin. So there was either a video to or an audio for him to review, and after a year he was able to compile all of those together and say, oh, this is my year's journey. That's one of the things I also encourage my students now to go to record themselves. When I teach kids, I actually record them playing, and so they could also track their progress. At this point, you played this conclusively. While I wish I never made some of these terrible mistakes, I'm quite thankful for my journey so far, because some of these mistakes have put me in a position where I could then guide other persons, and especially my students, guide them not to make such mistakes, because I've passed through that journey and I know, oh, these are the things you should do, these are the things you ought not to do. And I could also, like for example, for self-taught violins, I could provide guides for them. Oh, this is what you need to do next. Like I had to construct a curriculum to guide my students to practice. So after you do this is the next thing to do. And I'm quite grateful to all of my teachers, because they've actually made an impact in my journey, from Mr. Debola to Demola the violinist to Mr. Shola Peters, Christian Owls, and most recently Jeremy Molly. I'm grateful to all my teachers for their impact in my journey. Right. So so those were the 5 terrible mistakes I made as a beginner violinist. I wish some of which I wish I never made, but again, I'm grateful and thankful because it puts me in an advantage. Thank you. Now let me know some of the mistakes you made as a beginner violinist, or perhaps even as an advanced player that you wish you never made. And let me know in the comment section areas you also want to point out to me, how your journey has been, what are the things you did good, did very well, what are the areas you felt that you made certain mistakes, or areas you felt like, oh, I had a teacher, so I was knowledgeable about this earlier on in my journey. Let me know in the comment section. I would love to see your comments.